Okay, so with that, let us kick off with our first panelist today. Our first panelist is Pernilla Bergmark. Pernilla is a master researcher at Ericsson Research in Sweden. Our research interests are around how we do methodology development and assessment of climate impacts, circular economy, smart sustainable cities, and so on. She's been the co-author and part of the core team of the exponential roadmap for 1.5 degrees centigrade and the 1.5 degrees centigrade business playbook, which is a collaboration with Future Earth. She's also been very busy in standardization efforts and has contributed to the development of the ICT sectoral decarbonization approach. So lots of experience there. Pernilla, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. And yeah, as you said, I've been working actually for more than 25 years for the same private company, Ericsson. Originally, I was a system designer, but since 2008, I've been working full-time in sustainability, and during the last decade, also focused on research and standardization regarding digitalization and sustainability. And that has often been performed in close collaboration with academia. I'm also, as a person, a member of the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation and Amnesty since 40 years. And whenever I'm not fed up with social media, I'm trying to make my LinkedIn account a platform for advocating climate action. And I'm trying my best to be an ambassador for the exponential action, climate action roadmap that you mentioned, and for halving global emissions by 2030, not only focus on the distant 2050. I'm also a mother who wants a more sustainable future for my daughters and my son. So why do I overload you all with these details on my background, you may ask? I think that before we start to discuss collaboration between groups, we should remind ourselves for a second that these groups are to a large extent overlapping, and many of us are walking in and out of these groups all the time. Among my fellow panelists here today, I find a previous researcher and programmer who became a full-time activist, a researcher who is on the board for Greenpeace, and a civil servant who is also an ecologist. I find this promising, as I think this complex pattern of rules is not just something limited to this panel and the people in our community, but I think that this is something happening all the time. And I think there are at least two reasons for this. One is that sustainability topics are increasingly becoming part of the mainstream and integrated into the increasing numbers of societal activities and institutions. And we may all agree that this process, and especially responses to it, are way too slow. But compared to where we were 20 years ago, the change of mindset in companies and the public sector is remarkable. The second reason for roads becoming more intervened is that we all agree that the wicked problems we are facing cannot be solved by any individual organization. To truly work across silos, we need people who can bridge the realities of different societal sectors and players by their own experience. In the future, I think we need to see a greater movement between academia, bringing deep knowledge and scientific mindset, the private sector being used to deliver solutions and knowing about the practical challenges, the activists that could put pressure on companies and governments and make civil society voices heard, and the public sector which can set directions and frameworks. From the perspective of academia, I think this includes more actively bringing researchers to the rest of society, but also to expand opportunities for trained professionals from non-academic backgrounds to move into research and bring their experiences of specific but complex problems that must be solved. In addition, it incorporates better knowledge of what the industry is doing and not, and allows for integrating business realities such as economic restrictions making certain scenarios unlikely, and help identify the various ambitions and activities of the sector and its organizations leveraging the local presence of companies in many countries. So where are our teams when boundaries are blurred? Collaboration is important, and it's no coincidence that SDG number 17 addresses purposeful partnership. The challenges that are ahead of us are complex and wicked and can only be solved in collaboration. A colleague of mine once used the expression, the coalition of the willing, which has stayed with me ever since. I think this is key in collaboration, to find the like-minded people and the front runners independent of where they belong. But I also think that we must be careful to not only stay with those who think like us. There is, of course, a temptation to cozy up with the like-minded, but we also need those who challenge us. So we have to defend our positions and that provides us a greater learning opportunity and help us deepen our thoughts. But inclusion also demands more diverse teams. Obviously from justice and equality perspectives, but also to make sure that solutions that occur are given results in the reality they are created for different groups in society and in different countries. But above all, narrow groups mean narrow perspectives and narrow solutions. This is why we must come together and combine our competencies and backgrounds. And the famous out-of-the-box and innovative thinking is more likely to happen when we blend a variety of perspectives. Silos are not only boring, they are counterproductive. Here I think our own community could do better and work more actively to expand into communities of more diverse backgrounds and new regions. What are our best opportunities to make an impact? Which problems should we work on? Though it may sound strange for someone who has worked in the same company for a quarter of a century, I think that to help transform society to become a more sustainable place, we all need to review where we are and where we have the best platform to make a difference. Whether it is in a company, an organization, the public sector or university, and remember that this platform may change over time. To initiate change, we need change makers that push the ceiling from the inside as much as we need those who help lifting it from the outside. And to understand which problems are worth our effort, we need to learn from each other across sectors. Over the next 10 years, we must cut global emissions by half in every sector in every country, for us to manage to stay on the 1.5 C trajectory. Before this spring, it was thought that this kind of transformational change of economies could not happen. But this spring has taught us that humanity may change path drastically and more or less in one direction. And although no one wants a society in lockdown, we have learned that important lessons. We have learned the important lesson that society is changeable. Another lesson is that collaboration is possible and necessary. A third lesson is that ICT can help keeping society running even when we isolate physically. 3 important lessons, especially when combined. Society can be changed, collaboration helps us to manage crisis, and ICT can be used to keep society running. So what is the role of ICT in collaborations for sustainability? Obviously, ICT provides new tools for collaboration and democratize information and help invite more people into discussions when participation is less restricted by room, size, and cost, as experienced by many this spring. At the same time, ICT is a two-headed beast. Though I have found over the last day that I'm less concerned about its footprint than many of you, based on the research that we have performed, which make me confident that this footprint is fairly small compared to many other everyday activities, but of course something we should work to minimize. However, to me, a much greater concern is what we use ICT for. ICT has a unique role in making processes and usages more efficient, but it may be used, of course, to help decarbonize society, but also to detect new fossil sources and to make fossil industry, which must phase out, more economically viable. And we all know that both Greta Thunberg and the climate deniers are on social media platforms. To me, our collaborations should seek to expand what is good and suppress what is bad. I had planned to say a few words on collaborations that I have experienced from, but I think I'm overrunning the time, so I will skip that. So I know nothing of what I've said here is new to anyone in this room, and everything is grounded in personal reflections rather than expertise. But I think that sometimes we must take time and a step back to remind ourselves of the obvious things. And in the exponential roadmap where I've worked, we come back to the importance of transformation and scaling solutions, including good policies and behavioral changes exponentially. If we want to use our professional platforms to change the world for the better, we must ask ourselves how we can maximize our impact and find the collaborations which help us to do so. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to reflect on this important topic, and I look forward to this panel and to listen to the other panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Pernilla. Well, I'd like to come back to some of those personal experiences as we go through the panel, because I think that will be, certainly when we compare our personal experiences, that will be an interesting point of conversation for us. But let's now move on to our second panelist. So Rachel Lunnan, who describes herself as a former computer programmer. Pernilla, you talked about reviewing where we are and what we're doing, and Rachel has trod that path. She has a PhD from the University of Manchester, started out studying computer science, but shifted into mathematical logic, and worked in academia for a number of years with postdoc positions at Indiana University and UCLA, before leaving academia to work as a programmer for 20 years. And then I believe this is in the last couple of years, particularly with the growing street protests and the Extinction Rebellion, Rachel has given up that role as a programmer and has become a full-time activist. And in her bio, I love this, she spent over a week camping in London, sitting underneath a pink boat. So Rachel, tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so essentially I spent a week camping under a pink boat. It was an amazing experience. It felt like I'd kind of fallen down the Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole, and really changed my life. I was already making big changes because of the climate crisis, but very shortly after that, I handed in my resignation. So that was just over a year ago. I stopped working as a computer programmer, and I now either do activism, or I'm doing a part-time course studying sustainability. And in fact, this week in Bristol, there's a big protest going on because the city council is rowing back on their air pollution targets because of COVID-19. And if I wasn't here, I'd probably be doing police liaison at the base of Bristol City Council's building, because we've got 5 activists roped on up there with big banners, together with a number of other things going on. So I didn't look at what time I started here. Sorry, can you, how long have I got?
Oh, I wasn't keeping track of time. Just keep talking.
I'll keep going. What I want to do here is talk a little bit about the climate and the ecological emergency, because I think it's important that we reconnect with what's really going on every so often. So we are facing an emergency that it's an unprecedented crisis in human history, and we've faced the possible destruction of all that we hold dear. And this is caused by human activity, and we have to stop making it worse. We can't, it's a catastrophe we're not going to be able to think, invent, or buy our way out of. We actually have to start acting. And although it's going to affect us all, it's not affecting us all equally. The young and the powerless in society are going to be affected more. So not only are we stealing our own futures, but we're stealing the future of our youth and of future generations. We've got a heating world with climate breakdown already beginning. And those warmer temperatures are giving us extreme weather, floods, storms, droughts, and rising sea levels. We're seeing the effects of the heat stress in our ocean terrible degradation in our soil. So the impact on agriculture is giving us food security problems already. And the extreme weather events are causing homes to be destroyed. And if we look at the scenario of 4 degrees C above pre-industrial temperatures, I think for those of us living in temperate zones, it's easy to think, well, maybe that isn't so bad. But if you look at it, it is absolutely terrifying. So that's a possibility that we will reach 4 degrees C above pre-industrial temperatures this century. And it will mean more wildfires, unpredictable superstorms, scorching heat waves. Rising sea levels and droughts will render vast tracts of land uninhabitable through flooding and desertification. And the receding glaciers and uncertain rainfall will cut off fresh water supplies for millions. So we're talking about terrible food insecurity for us, as well as the places where these things are happening, because we don't grow most of our own food. And lack of access to water and shelter for many people. So we're talking mass migration, famine, and potential civil unrest, war, and societal collapses. So one of the discussion points was to think about the barriers to sustainability. And what I want to say is that we have to start with the political and economic system itself. Because our economic system is based on growth, the increasing consumption of natural resources means that we're wreaking terrible environmental damage in collecting our environmental resources for that growth. And then we've got all these waste products that we've got to get rid of, and we end up polluting our land, our rivers, and our air with those waste products. And the system is often putting the onus on the individual consumers to make correct environmental choices. Attempts to factor in the environmental issues into the economic model don't work. So you end up with carbon credit schemes, people start planting trees, but who's properly looking after those trees? Some of those trees are just sort of mass planted, not properly looked after. And they're not wildlife rich necessarily but in and of themselves as carbon credits, wildlife rich habitats. Okay, just sort of briefly, I'm going to have a little think about what maximising profits does to something like the housing market. So naively, you think that housing, the purpose of housing is to provide houses for people. But factor in your property speculators, your large building corporations, and your landlords who want to make sure that they've got money in retirement. And you realise that for them, housing is about making money, and they're not particularly concerned about how big the homeless problem is or whether there's affordable rents for people on low incomes. Okay, and that pattern to maximise profits rather than provide services that people need is repeated throughout different industries. In the tech industry, we've got issues like built-in obsolescence, devices that are difficult, if not impossible, to repair, and devices where it's pretty difficult to reclaim the materials for recycling. You know, they're not designed so that you can recycle those important and precious materials that go into them. And what I want to say is governments are unable or unwilling to act on the ecological crisis. The first IPCC report was more than 30 years ago, talking about the effects of humanity on the climate and the need for action. And since then, we've just been increasing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Not only are we increasing, but if you look at the graphs, each year the amount we increase it by goes up, with the largest being last year. Okay, so today, the UK government's Committee on Climate Change has just produced an absolutely damning report that shows that the UK government's lack of action is absolutely staggering. We're not on track to meet most of the government's own targets, and I would argue that those targets fall short of what I would like to guarantee my children a livable planet for their future. Okay, so what do we do? I'm just going to introduce, in case you haven't heard of them, Extinction Rebellion's demands. So demand number 1 is tell the truth. And this is a radical truth telling. It's no good to just once or every so often say, well, yes, there is a climate and ecological emergency. To tell the truth, you have to really face the truth. And I think actually connect with what that means for you and those that you love with. And it's a daily act. It's not just every so often. Demands number 2 from Extinction Rebellion is act now. So this is an emergency, and I want to ask the question, are we treating it as such? We need to act as if our futures are on the line and as if our children's lives and well-being are on the line, because they really are. So I'm not an expert in climate, I'm not an expert in economics, and I don't consider myself a technology expert at this point. I'm standing here or sitting here in front of you because I'm beginning to live my life as if there's an emergency. And I think it's important that while personal action is very important, you cannot by yourself solve the problem. You can only make a small amount of difference. And that's true for our institutions individually as well. So our almost unavoidable participation in this system becomes justified only when it's coupled with our best efforts to bring about the transition to a truly sustainable society. And what I'm saying is that has to happen through system change. History shows us, if we look at the suffragettes, if we look at the civil rights movements, if we look at what happened for civil rights in India, that we need to push our governments and make them protect the citizens. Okay, I'm going to pass it back.
All right, thank you very much, Rachel. Yes, these are challenges to us all to think about. Certainly, are we living as though we are in an emergency? Many of us have studied it from a research perspective, and maybe don't connect it with the rest of what we're doing. Let's switch now to a more academic perspective. So our next panelist is Tilman Santiaris, who's Professor for Societal Transformation and Sustainable Digitalization at the Technical University of Berlin and at the Einstein Center Digital Futures in Germany, where Tilman is a senior fellow. He's published many topics on climate policy, world trade, sustainable economics and global justice, and of course, digital transformation. And apart from these articles, he's also co-authored several books, the most recent of which just appeared last month, Smart Green World, Making Digitalization Work for Sustainability. He has been active in international NGO networks, the Climate Action Network, and Our World Is Not for Sale. And for 10 years, he's served as a board member of the Environment and Development NGO German Watch, and for 4 years on the board of Greenpeace. So, Tilman.
Thanks, Steve. Hello, everybody. Yes, thank you for the introduction. And I particularly like the passionate comments or talks from my previous speakers. Since you announced me now as an academic, I have to be less passionate, I think, and do it more structured. So I even have a couple of slides to share with you, the old PowerPoint story, but there's, I guess, just going to be a very, very few slides. And let me first start with a couple of premises. Now, if the key question for us here is, how can we challenge activism, academia, industry to work more closely together in order to use ICT better for sustainability? I have a couple of premises here, and I think these are my convictions, but maybe, I don't know the ICT4S community as long as some others of yours, but maybe these are also some no-brainers and common convictions in the ICT4S community. For one, I think many of us will share that ICT are neither good or bad. It depends on the very specifics and also on the framework conditions, how they play out for sustainability, right? Then also the old question of whether overall we have positive or negative net balance of ICT, I think we cannot solve it, or at least we shouldn't wait for the day until we may solve it. Rather, third point, we need to follow a precautionary approach and much more actively shape the process of ICT innovation and application towards the greater environmental and social good. And I think we already had a couple of talks dealing exactly with this issue, as for instance, Marina this morning. Another premise, I think, is that we are a little bit more tempted in the ICT first community here towards the environmental aspects of sustainability. However, I think environmental and social benefits and risks of ICT need to be balanced, and we need a more integrated view, no siloed thinking. Again, Marina was great this morning when she talked about the social digital costs and linked it up to environmental issues, and other talks here at the conference exactly already try to intertwine the environmental and the social aspects somewhat better. Another observation I do is that I still have the impression that public and policy discourses in many countries are still superficial and oscillate between like hype, ICT can solve it all, it will heal the world, or history, maybe like it's the devil and we should be very careful with any more AI or something like that. I really think we need a more comprehensive, holistic perspective, and therefore interlink the different disciplines in science, but also the different knowledge communities, academia, politics, business, NGOs, to really make those actors work together better.
So can I briefly interrupt? We don't see your slides yet. Is there?
Yeah, now I'm going to start sharing.
Right, good. Just worrying there that we were not seeing something we should be seeing. All right, good.
This was just do you see them right now?
Yeah,
are they visible? Yes, great. So now having said this, I think these are a couple of points I want to address, and I mainly want to share information of what I and what my research groups and what colleagues of mine have done in Germany. So to give you an idea how we approach these issues. So what I just said is to improve cooperation between academia and societal actors, I think we should conduct more transformative knowledge research. How do we really achieve this sustainable digitalization? We should develop more integrated views on environmental and social sustainability. We should foster exchange between different knowledge communities. Maybe we can, as scientific actors, persons from academia, can engage better in agenda setting for a more balanced public and policy discourse, not the hype history one, and overall empower politics, business, NGOs to more strongly work together. Now, let me just go into the details here a little bit. Research on transformative knowledge. Here's what Steve has already mentioned. My colleague Stefan and I, we have published a book built on the knowledge from all our research group. And yes, we do have a part of analysis in there on ecological sustainability. I'm sure that most of you will not learn much new here in these chapters. Also on social and economic justice. Maybe, yeah, I'm not sure whether you're going to learn much more, but maybe it's interesting how we approach the issue here. But more importantly, what I'm saying is that we developed principles for sustainable digitalization and a set of policy options, policy measures, design principles for business people, ideas for sustainable use patterns. And overall, the book is a good read for not for academia, but more for the general public, for politicians, etc. As I said, integrate environmental and social sustainability. This is one of the key goals of the book. And I show you a chart here, a slide with our 3 guiding principles for a sustainable digitalization. You see digital efficiency, strict data protection, and focus on the common good. And then we have 9 sub-principles or more detailed principles underneath those. But from the structure, you see that we try to address environmental issues, hard and software sustainability, economic sufficiency and others with the whole discourse of more strict data protection. And we also outline how data protection is helping environmental sustainability and vice versa. But then we have a whole set of ideas on focusing on the common good, using or reinstalling the internet as a commons, the idea of cooperative platforms. And so in the mix, what we've tried to do is develop guiding principles that address both environmental and social sustainability. Now, when it comes to foster exchange between knowledge community, let me just share with you what me and many other actors in Germany have done in the last 2 years. In 2018, I initiated a conference which we in Germany call Bits and Bäume. The literal translation would be bits and trees. It stands for the bits, the more tech and hacker and net politics communities and NGOs, and the Bäume, the trees, represents the environmental and development NGO community, the sustainability NGOs. And the idea of the conference was to bring together these communities that so far, at least in Germany, but I'm assuming in most other countries as well, have not really cooperated with each other, like the Greenpeace, the Friends of the Earth, the WWFs, with in Germany, the Chaos Computer Club, with Digital Courage, with other networks playing out for net neutrality or for other net political issues. And these are huge communities by themselves, but had very little overlap so far. And we brought them together in that conference. It was a real success with 2,000 participants over 2 days, many, many talks and workshops. You can check out the webpage. And it's going on. We have several regional events now. We have groups as offsprings in Dresden, in Freiburg, in Berlin, in some other communities. And our research group, we run a series of talks now, which we call the Forum Bits and Bäume, 6 workshops over the course of 2 years to address the science policy interface of these issues. Just a preview of what we're trying to do in order to even more foster the exchange between different knowledge communities. We're going to set up a dialogue project, Science Network 4.0, Digitalization and Sustainability. Johanna Pohl, who many of you also know, is going to coordinate this project together with me. And we're trying to bring together over the course of 2 years 12 experts from European universities. And I've already talked to some of the experts here at ICT4S to engage to combine as many different disciplines as possible to get a holistic view on the issue of digitalization and sustainability. Here are some of the goals that we're trying to pursue. I'm not going to go into more details here, but this is just a sneak preview of what we want to do in order to even better foster the exchange between knowledge communities in the next 2 years. And then finally, let me step back from my own things and what we did in the past 2 years. Let's look at what happened in Germany overall. I think with our book Smart Green World and with the Bits and Bäume conference, but also with what other actors have done in the last 2 years in Germany. For instance, we had a huge, very big comprehensive study by a advisory council to the German government on digitalization and sustainability, which came out last summer in 2019. And all these activities together led the Federal Environmental Ministry to really take action. And last year they announced like 11 key points, and this year in March, they presented a real comprehensive digital policy agenda for the environment. This is the logo that you see on the picture. I think it's available in English. And if you're really interested in how politics tries to take on some of the ideas that many of us have in the ICT4S community and put it into legislative initiatives, ideas for regulation, incentivization. And so you should definitely check that out. It's very comprehensive, 40 pages with policy suggestions. Now Germany wants to try to move on and use the EU Council presidency in autumn 2020 in order to make spillover some of the ideas from the digital policy agenda onto the EU level. Sustainable digitalization is going to be one of the foci of the EU Council presidency of Germany. And there will be several events in collaboration with DG Connect and DG Environment and other member states. There will be an exploratory report by the European Economic Social Committee on digitalization sustainability. I happen to be the one of the experts announced for this exploratory report. There will be public events in Brussels in November 2020 if it takes place due to Corona. So I would really love to move on and bring what we've done in Germany. I think what in a couple of other countries has already succeeded to shape and set the public and the policy agenda with our issues, and move on in more countries and at the EU level. And I would love to hear what how some of us maybe can cooperate on this endeavor. Thanks so far.
Excellent, thank you, Tilman. Okay, so our fourth panelist, I've been realizing that I've been labeling everybody as where they come from, and we've all got feet in many different camps, so that's unfair. But maybe I'll say Adam is bringing a perspective from government. So Adam Turner is the Sustainable Technology Lead in the UK's Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. He's a chartered environmentalist with a background in ecology, and as Government Lead for Sustainable Technology and Chair of the Pan-Government Sustainable Technology Advice and Reporting. He led the creation of the UK Government Sustainable Technology Strategy, that was 2018 to 2020, and is busy preparing a new version of that strategy for the next 5 years that will be published later this year. And prior to working at DEFRA, Adam spent several years working on delivering sustainable ICT and digital policy solutions at the Ministry of Defence. So Adam.
Hello, thank you. It's great, bunch of fantastic talks so far, and hopefully what I'm going to do is cover all of that stuff again, but hopefully add something new as well. So yeah, I'm going to share some slides because I'm a civil servant and that's what we do. Yeah, so there's my contact details. This is, in terms of scope, this is about what we do internally. Sustainable ICT, unfortunately, unlike what Tilman was just on about there, is not a policy area with a big P. I am working very hard to make this a policy area with a big P. I think COP26 is a massive opportunity for this. I think sustainable digital is going to be front and centre in COP26. Personally, I'm moving away from the term sustainability to responsible and resilient, and you'll hear me covering that as I go through. So we've been doing this quite a long time, over 10 years. We originally talked, sustainable IT was called green IT, for those who've been involved in this long enough, and our original strategy was about moving and greening our estates in terms of our government estates. And we did that fairly successfully. We moved a bunch of stuff from fairly dirty, power-hungry data centers and power-hungry desktops to more efficient end-user devices and to more efficient hosting providers. I came along in 2018 to the chairmanship. I was involved before that, but I took over chairmanship in 2018. And I changed it to sustainability, which we've heard about talks. So picking up on all three pillars of sustainability. It's not just about environmental. The big change I brought in there to what we were doing is to think about the social pillar and to think about the services that we are consuming as part of our impact. Our requirements creates that impact. It's no good, and you'll see on my next slide, no good saying that we're getting greener, when actually we're just giving all of our impact to Amazon. So the new strategy is, as I say, responsible and resilient, and it's picking up on all of those sort of drivers on the right-hand side there around net zero, 25-year environment plan, which for those of you who don't know is our UK leave the environment in a better place than when we inherited it. All the other stuff you know that. Modern slavery, probably important to mention. To our PM, Boris Johnson published a modern slavery statement on behalf of the UK government. ICT was called out in there as very high risk. So the group I chair is pulling together guidance and stuff on modern slavery so that we can help improve that situation, because it's awful what's going on in that, as touched on by Rachel. In terms of what underpins a lot of this, we do a lot of footprint data reporting. So this is per end user kilowatt hours per year. So you'll see when we started doing this, we had around 1,500 kilowatt hours per year, and we translate this into carbon as well using the carbon factors. As I say, that original strategy was about green ICT, so we were offshoring that responsibility, and so our annual reports were showing this wonderful good news story of this chart going down bit like the charts we've been seeing on the news every day, going down and down and down, until I came along and ruined it all in 2018 by saying that our services are actually in scope. Hence the 2019 column, which is actually about the equivalent of a UK household in terms of footprint. So per end user across government, 500,000 end users, they are all using the same electricity to power their IT. And by that, I mean their end user devices, the network equipment and the servers in the background running it all as they are for running their households for a year. The big unknown on top of that chart is what's in the cloud. And then we've been pushing for the last 2 years to get information from cloud providers, because as I say, our footprint is largely with them now, and that hasn't been possible for a bunch of technical and commercial reasons that I'm happy to discuss a bit later. But just say we've been trying to do that. In terms of our new strategy, we've been doing this through my pan-government group. That's not just members of people from across government. We've also got academia on there. Some of you may know Dr. Rabi Bashroush, who's a member of that group. We've also got Tech UK. We've also got Carbon Trust, charities, professional bodies like BCS, the Green IT group, who are doing some work through this. So they're all members of my group. And really, this vision statement, I've been challenged on the global leader. Listening to Tillman there, probably not, but we want to be the best that we possibly can be. We want to make sure our digital infrastructure that we are consuming is rationalised, i.e. there's no waste in it. We're not just buying more stuff and designing more stuff and adding to that stack without thinking about it. We're responsible about what we're doing, and we're resilient. And I'll touch on that a little bit more. That modern slavery element, and overall we're creating some kind of a benefit. And in order to do that, we really need to understand what our footprint is. As I say, we're not quite there yet. In terms of big picture, broad outcomes, by the end of 2025, we want to see reduced carbon costs. And by that, I mean full life cycle carbon analysis of the services we're using. It's no good for me if we're just saying that our services are using green electricity or they're offsetting all their carbon. What I'm talking about here is the carbon embedded and embodied in the servers that we're using, because you know, if you're replacing those every 18 months, 2 years, and they're going off to landfill and 80% of that is just going east and we don't really know where it's going, that's absolutely no good. So there's a full circular vision built into this strategy and a bunch of targets there as well. Resilience, picking up on what Rachel was on about, is not on about business as usual resilience. This is about, in the face of an ecological breakdown, this is my ecologist coming out here, the world is changing. We are all screwed unless we do something really massive here. So this is about understanding our supply chains, about mapping our supply chains and managing those and thinking about this. And my background in MOD here is relevant because, of course, if you're providing critical services to frontline services that are doing really tricky stuff around the world, it's absolutely no good to them if their services are very, very vulnerable in delivering that from flooding or geopolitical activity or whatever. Responsibility is about doing the right thing, and a central pillar of what we're doing is the responsible digital citizen. I am pushing that concept across government to get everybody aware of what they are doing and their responsibilities as an end user. I publish blogs on this using some of Dr. Rabi Bashroush's data, but this is about getting everyone on board across government to do that right thing. Transparency and collaboration is about us within government publishing our reports, but we already do, but also publishing our data so that everyone can use it and see what we're doing. Collaboration is already pretty good, but I think we could do a lot better. So what I've proposed in the strategy is much more of a cross-government approach to engaging with suppliers on a cross-government basis, because everything, as we've been talking about silos earlier, it's very much in accounts. So you've got an account lead for HP, for AWS, for Ericsson, for everyone, and they will speak to you individually, but we need this holistic view. Otherwise, this is just silly and we're just duplicating and we're wasting, which is everything that we're trying to go against. Accountability could also read as visibility. Sustainable ICT is not mainstream, and I'm pushing to make it so it keeps dropping off the headlines thanks to Extinction Rebellion and Greta and everything in the last year or 18 months. My job has been an awful lot easier. Prior to that, I was literally hauled out of rooms for daring to talk about sustainability because I was called a greeny lefty sort of nonsense monger. So it's been brilliant to have that there to help me to open doors, to increase that accountability at ministerial level, so that sustainable ICT is seen in there as part of that big picture. And of course, COVID-19 has given that opportunity, all the stuff that we've been talking about for 10 years, to work digitally, to use less transport, to reduce our waste, all the rest of it. We are going to capture through the reporting that I showed on the previous slide, that ICT is going to go up, our footprint's going to go up, yes, but also everything else is going to come down, and we'll be able to show that balance. And my prediction would be that ICT footprint is nowhere near as much as all the savings that have been achieved everywhere else. So we will get this overall benefit, and we'll be able to test that in about 6 months, I hope, assuming things get back to normal. I shall stop there.
All right, thank you, Adam. So let's move into a more interactive discussion part now. And if any of the attendees want to ask questions, please type them into the Slack channel, and I will pick them up from there and pose them to our panelists. But let me maybe start off with a question that picks up on some of what the panelists have talked about. And I think particularly getting to grips with the perspective that Rachel offered us, this idea that we're in an emergency, we need to act as though we're in an emergency. And of course, in the extreme case, that might mean, yeah, we give up our jobs and we do something very different on the front lines as activists. Or I think, as Pernilla was suggesting, we need change makers working from the inside of organizations. And maybe the answer is a bit of both. But I guess my question is, many of us, and I include myself in this group, we have jobs that we've been in perhaps for a long time, and we tend to do the same things that we've always done. We write reports, we publish books, we publish papers. We're academics. If we're in government, we publish more reports, more strategy documents. At what point do we say, actually, none of that is working, and we need to rethink the roles that we're playing within our organizations, or even leave those altogether? So maybe I'll do a quick go round of the panelists and reflect upon that dilemma, because I'm sure you've all struggled with that question. And as Pernilla, you were way back at the beginning, so let's come back to you first. Tell us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, okay. Very tough question, and I think I mentioned that in my speech, really, that I think that this is something we should struggle with all the time. We should always sort of question where we are and where we should be. And I'm certainly doing that, and becoming more and more aware of how big the problems are over the last few years. I've also been in a context with, as part of this project, and you can look it up if you're not familiar with it, the Exponential Climate Action Roadmap, which when I've done the equation for myself, I've seen that has provided me much more platform than it would do to do something else. And I've also been working a lot in standardization on trajectories for the overall sector to decarbonize. So currently I've come to the conclusion that I should remain, but I think that is something we should reevaluate all the time, really.
Mm-hmm. And Rachel, I'm going to pose the question slightly differently to you, because you have made the transition. One of the things I'm curious about in your role as an activist is, are you able to draw upon all that experience both in academia and and in the IT industry, or is it a complete break? I mean, does it match up in any way?
Can I also answer your question a little
Sure,
bit,
absolutely.
as well, which is to say, although I am saying that I want you all to go away and really start living your lives as if this is an emergency, that doesn't necessarily mean to give up your job. That will be a case of you evaluating where your contribution is best. But I would argue that it should involve some amount of non-violent direct action or supporting non-violent direct action, because we are so far from being on that rapid decarbonisation pathway that you mentioned earlier. So in terms of, Yeah, I don't use any of it. I mean, there are things that I could do in terms of getting involved in perhaps writing useful apps for activists to communicate with each other during a big action. But I've never been particularly interested. I always did sort of deep internal stuff rather than building apps for people to communicate with each other. So yeah, what I actually do is mostly hands-on activism, and I've done a huge amount, for example, of police liaison. It's so far away from sitting at the computer terminal and programming in C all day.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Tillman.
Yeah, you said we shouldn't just publish more reports and more papers and more books. I somewhat agree, but I think it much depends on what kind of publications these are. So if we wanted to look self-critical at the ICT First conference, we have these conversations where we exchange views and feedback on scientific papers. Maybe we can add in the future another track where we have more exchange on communications that are directed towards societal actors, like policy briefs or you know, things that are more likely to be relevant for societal actors, for those that we on this panel discuss to work more closely together with. So I think it depends on the kind of publication and more. So, I mean, we're scientists, we're pretty good at putting the papers out, but then we turn towards the next one. And I think if we would spend more energy on getting our insights that we currently, continuously develop out there into the public or policy discourse, I think we would also be more relevant in a way. And so this is also my experience now coming to your, Steve, to what you said, we're in the midst of a crisis, and Rachel, you said it as well. And how can we become more active towards solving that crisis? My personal experience is, for example, on the board of Greenpeace, where we have at least 4 meetings, 3 days each a year on strategy, on campaigning, on what Greenpeace does worldwide and in Germany. And I just noticed that ICT and the issues that we deal with are rather small and niche issues for those actors. Not only Greenpeace, but also for other NGOs, and I think maybe also for some of the governments still. So explaining why this is a cross-cutting issue, why it plays into so many areas, like the mobility transition, we will probably not get it done with a big role of ICT playing energy transition anyway. I mean, that is probably already out there, this message, but mobility transition, even consumption, I think we need more explanation and more exchange on the role that ICT can play, both as a benefit and as a risk, in order for the societal actors to notice that this is not just a sort of an interesting niche one, but key for the actual goals that they are pursuing. And still probably, I mean, if there is a protest against a new coal-fired plant, or if there is some campaigning needed for the huge oil spill in Russia, or et cetera, there will probably be other issues that are more important than the ones that we have on a daily basis. So we will always have to compete with those bigger issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Adam.
Thank you. Yeah, I struggle with the two sides of this. When I was at MOD, greener by default was very much a mentality that was pushed out, and there was an awful lot of greenwash around technology. What I've been pushing and why I'm staying in the job that I'm in, although it is really hard to do this, is trying to push that agenda for transparency with our suppliers. And it's only by doing what I did last year, where, as I say, 25 government departments formally went through commercial channels to cloud providers to say, can we have a carbon footprint for the services we're consuming? That made Computer Weekly, the Register, you know, it went out fairly government probe into cloud footprint. Off the back of that, suddenly, I'm not saying it was entirely down to me, but Microsoft launched a Power BI tool for cloud footprint. And then Amazon emailed me today to say they're going to start releasing data for the carbon footprint for the cloud. Until we understand what we're consuming and we get our true footprint, it's only then that we can start to understand how we can get the benefits off the back of it. And what I'm really, really worried about is you know, blockchain, AI for Earth campaigns saying how wonderful this is all going to be, when actually we don't understand, we truly don't understand the impact of this. When companies like Apple, I'm probably going to get myself in trouble here, but when companies like Apple have a non-new resource commitment to take nothing out of the earth, and yet they don't own the stuff at end of life, it goes off into the supply chain and it ends up being dumped across the world. That is criminal. It's absolutely awful. So we've got to move to this circular model. We've got a long way to go. I am treating this as an emergency, and I'm trying to push this in. I'm really pleased that civil servants I work with, not all of them of course, but I work with some very, very passionate and talented individuals that are also some of the members of XR that are helping to push this into our thinking. We've got a long way to go, and I'm really pleased to be part of this today because I want to join up.
Yeah, okay, good. So I've got a question. I'm going to pick out various different questions from the Slack channel, but here I think is an interesting one, and it speaks to, we talked a little bit about drawing out our own personal experiences in this discussion. So Ryan Eccles asks, what are the biggest barriers for each panelist? And where can other disciplines or other sectors help fill those gaps? And as you're talking about this, one of the things that I'd like to draw out as well is, where have each of you had most productive experiences in collaborating, especially across some of these barriers, getting out of our silos? Let's mix up the order a little bit. I'm going to randomly pick on Tillman. I'm going to throw this one at you first. Biggest barriers and/or most interesting and productive collaborations across the usual disciplinary boundaries.
I mean, the biggest barrier is probably personally my time constraints. Probably many will share this. And there's only some amount of networking and collaboration that you can do when you have so many other tasks. I think a big barrier also is language. I think we probably all know this from transdisciplinary research projects where you engage with societal actors. It's so hard to find a language that are not only understandable for the others, but relevant, you know. This sort of links to what a couple of us said and what I said before, that I think many societal actors still have the feeling that AI or the footprint of data centers or so is not so relevant for them. And I think that also has to do with language. So language is a big barrier. And power dynamics. I mean, we are in a situation where we are a very small community here dealing with these issues. And there's, Adam, you just mentioned AI for Earth. I mean, this is a very powerful campaign. I would even say campaign. It's not only a funding line of Microsoft or so to get some money out there in a benevolent philanthropy way. It's a communications campaign also. So we have to fight with these issues and the language that's put out there in order to confuse the public with wrong solutions and stuff like that.
Okay, Rachel, I'll go to you next.
So I think, I was sort of thinking a little bit about my time as a programmer. I do see sort of, so am I talking about barriers to moving towards sustainability here?
Barriers that you have encountered yourself, and/or, so there's a two-sided question. One is what barriers you've encountered in achieving what you're trying to achieve. Right. And the other is, where have there been the most productive collaborations across the usual boundaries?
Yeah, so I suppose one barrier perhaps is that being part of a movement that calls itself Extinction Rebellion, a lot of people can find it quite hard to talk to me. So simply going up and saying, hi, I'm part of Extinction Rebellion, I think you have to have started taking the climate emergency very seriously already. Or, you know, when we do start talking to people, I think that they can find that most people within Extinction Rebellion are just normal people who've started to maybe a bit further down a path that I hope more of us will go along. I am not sure where I think perhaps listening to the talks today, my feeling is actually I need to be reaching out more and talking to more people, and perhaps my productive collaborations lie ahead of me after this experience.
Okay, very nice. Adam.
Okay, yeah, barriers is what Tillman's also touched on, is around visibility of this topic. My daily battle is speaking to senior leaders across government, getting them to input sustainability as a lens onto whatever they are doing. My latest battles are around the National Digital Strategy and the National Data Strategy, which have been in the press lately. There's lots of talk around how data and digital can empower the UK economy and drive it forward post-COVID. But sustainability is not very mature in that thinking yet, so I'm fighting to get that in, and that is a constant battle. So that's why I said right at the beginning of my talk, at the beginning, is about making this a policy area with a big P. I think it's really, really important. It's split across every single government department, you know, business and industry own part of it, Home Office own part of it. It's spread across. This needs some focus. In terms of collaboration, I'll give a shout out to my colleague Matti Jetta within DEFRA, who's formed the DEFRA E-Sustainability Alliance. I think it's a fantastic example of bringing together main players under the current DEFRA IT contract. So you name it in terms of suppliers, they are part of that group. But we've also got NGOs. Big conference next week with the UNFCCC, a part of that, meeting commitments for net zero by 2025 within the IT industry. So she is trying to push that within DEFRA and really trying to push that collaboration through DEFRA channels beyond what I'm doing sort of across government with academia and things like that. So things are improving, but as I say, this has been really, really recent. If we were having this conversation 2 years ago, I would have had very little to report. It's changing rapidly.
Okay. And Pernilla. Hang on, I think you're muted. Let me...
So, from the barrier perspective, I would say, like, as Tillman mentioned, resources and time, but then I think also I sometimes find myself in the peculiar situation where I'm trying to push a more ambitious agenda, while I see NGOs who should be pushing me, pushing back, holding back a bit. So I would really like to be more challenged as a company by the NGOs when we are to bring, you know, work together with front runners. And also sometimes to have a fact-based dialogue is a challenge. And in terms of collaboration, I must mention the Center for Sustainable Communication, although it is no more, as it was a cross-sector and cross-discipline research platform in Sweden. And the development had recently of trajectories to have global emissions of ICT operators by 2030. And the note to Adam there, I think you should really put in 2030 into your plans and goals. And then finally, the exponential roadmap, which collected academia and civil society and businesses to really advocate for halving emissions by 2030, and which have had spin-offs like this business playbook for 1.5, which has been adopted by the International Chamber of Commerce and also been used for education and by cities wanting a roadmap.
Okay, thanks. The next question is specifically for Adam, and clearly within our community, and it's come up a number of times in some of what we already talked about, there is skepticism that government is willing and able to do what's necessary. So the question is from Caroline: how do we know that the government really is listening, and what is the government doing to reach out, for example, to take more seriously the perspectives that groups like Extinction Rebellion and our campaigning NGOs bring?
Yeah, I thought this might come up. So I have to be really clear here. My responsibilities are for internal government procurements for sustainable ICT. What I'm fighting to change is exactly what that question's highlighting there. I think this is a policy area. And by that, I mean government taking grasp of this and pushing out legislation if needed. and policy on the collected topics under the banner of sustainable ICT. I think the opportunity is there with COP26 and chairmanship of this to do that a lot better. But I have to say, and I think I don't think I'd be getting myself into trouble by saying it's in its infancy, and that, you know, there's not many voices like me pushing for this. You know, there's lots and lots of really good work out there around energy efficiency, around eco labels, around, but obviously challenges with leaving the EU that are probably yet to roll out and realise what that actually means in terms of adopting all of this good stuff that largely currently comes from the EU. I'm afraid that's probably about as good an answer as I can give on that topic. Yeah. I personally, as the person responsible for this internally, want to do what the question asks, and I will do everything I possibly can to make that happen. Whether I get a chance to sit with the PM to make that happen is another question. Probably not when I'm looking like this. I need a haircut.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Actually, I've got a similar question to Rachel, and again, it kind of reverses the question. So Extinction Rebellion have been very successful in terms of generating media attention and some really interesting ways of doing different things at a demonstration to get the publicity. But how are XR doing with collaboration, for example, collaborating with academia, collaborating with industry and so on? So is it very much we're just gonna shout in the streets and make you face up to this truth? Or are there those collaborations that are productive?
There certainly are a certain amount of collaborations. I mean, I'm actually keep an eye on a subgroup within XR, which is XR scientists, where anybody who has a sort of higher degree in a sciencey subject can be part of that group. And we've obviously got a number of environmental scientists in there as well as others. Yeah, so there are collaborations in different places. They're less so, I feel, in industry. I don't know many other programmers. I do know some people who've got a bit of an interest in programming, but there's it definitely seems to be less from the ICT area that have come and joined us. But again, it's something I think that we could do better at reaching out and perhaps starting some dialogues and saying, hey, can we come and talk to you and show you that we're not crazy. We are actually reasonable people who just are in this very unreasonable, if the governments do nothing, situation.
Yeah, okay, absolutely. Tillman.
Yeah, just wanted to go on the industry and business is not the same, I think, here. I mean, we have industry, I consider industry to be the larger corporations within the business sector, but there's so many startups and small businesses and one-man or one-woman shows with people that do want to make business, but that have a normative conviction and want to contribute to solve the, let's say, climate crisis or whatever. And I think it would be nice to interlink with this community as well. I'm not even sure if it's community. I think these are often just standalone players, but we could also help make it a community. For example, by a common conference or something like that, or some other venues where you try to get the startup community, or at least those startup people that pursue a deliberately sustainability-oriented business case with our scientists and with maybe the civil society and the politicians and so on. So I think this is an untapped resource when we talk of the business sector. Sometimes these actors, startups, are more dynamic and also more free to move and to be more outspoken on some things like the climate crisis than the big industries are.
And I just want to say I've got two reactions to that. And one is that, oh, wow, maybe we should have a conversation afterwards about some of those things. But also it comes back to one of those barriers that you were talking about earlier, for both of us probably, of having enough time to, and to actually go, because that community could be created. And what we need is people who are passionate about it, who will go and make those connections.
Mm-hmm. Can I just add a couple of thoughts here? I mentioned about the responsible digital citizen concept in my new strategy for Intel, but the reason I've done that is that continually when I go around and give talks on sustainable IT, people just do not connect their smartphone usage with impact on IT. It is non-existent out there in the public. You know, extremely low levels of recognition that there's even an impact to using Instagram or Facebook or whatever. So I think the more we can push that concept out there and get that linkage between environmental and ecological breakdown and the use of smartphones and IT in a non-productive way, the more it will likely push through NGOs, etc., to push this whole thing forward. The other thing, just briefly, is my colleague who's also on the STAR, Ben Tung, who works for NHS Digital, did a brilliant bringing together of Extinction Rebellion, of small startups. So we had a blockchain finance who were using, they were using digital money using blockchain, but completely carbon neutral use of that. So there was a bringing together all these different people with sustainability agendas from business to wrap into this sustainable ICT banner. But again, we're breaking new ground with this, that there's not a lot of pre-existing material out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the questions that has come up in the chat picks up on the point Rachel made, partly about decoupling growth from the economic system, but also that example Rachel gave of the housing system, where we struggle with many people treating housing as a profit-making enterprise rather than a providing a service enterprise. And I think that's a really good analogy for the way that a large part of the ICT industry operates as well. So maybe I'll throw this question at Pernilla first, especially in a research lab, an industry research lab. There is a tendency across the ICT industry just to see everything to do with digital technologies as, okay, this is another profit-making, another chance to make more profits, to sell us new equipment. And we talked about things like built-in obsolescence, make us all throw away our previous generation of phones and replace them with new ones. And in the process, as Adam pointed out, many of us, as in our role as consumers, have forgotten about how that connects with the rest of the world. You know, we love our digital devices, and we don't want to have to think about the broader responsibility and the broader impacts. So within a research lab, Pernilla, how does that kind of conversation play out? Is that something that you and your colleagues struggle with? Hang on, yeah, okay, good.
Yeah. Sorry, I was muted. So first I should maybe explain what kind of company I come from. I come from Ericsson, which is not selling any devices or consumer products, because we provide the connectivity. And when it comes to connectivity, it's a very different business, because planned obsolescence or short lives, that is translates into
Uh-oh, we've lost you, Pernilla. This was going to happen sooner or later. Oh, okay. She's dropped out. All right, we'll come back to that question. All right. So another question. Actually, oh, are you there, Pernilla?
Yeah, now I'm back. I don't know what happened. It's just closed down suddenly.
We're just saying about providing connectivity, I think, and it cut out.
Yeah, thank you. So it's a very different business where we want things to last for a long time. So I don't have that much experience as a company of that. But of course, I've been working a lot in standardization, and there is a lot of efforts ongoing within the EU to standardize those things. But it's a fairly slow process, I would say. So I think there might be things that drive this agenda in a quicker way. I think I only captured half your question there, because I had some point that I thought was important in this context, but maybe I'll come back on that later.
Sure. Okay. Did any of the other panelists want to jump in on that one? I mean, it's a massive challenge for the entire ICT industry, just in terms of the relationship that we've developed, you know, as a society with our digital technologies, and the way that drives us just to demand more and more consumption of the technology. Got a question, actually, again inspired by one of Rachel's comments about tell the truth. And the worry, of course, is this is a question from Carla. If we push people to tell the truth and we really get to grips with the truth about climate change, will it not just cause people to panic and shut down and maybe, you know, not change for the good, but even just walk away or into denial? And I know in the climate science world, this conversation comes up a lot, that if you overdo the alarmism, even when the alarmism is very much justified by the scientific basis, it does cause people to shut down and not want to engage with it, because it's just too big and too scary a problem to deal with. So maybe this is a question for all of you. I don't know how much you've encountered that in what you're doing, and whether you've had to tailor how you talk to people about certainly the scale of the challenge that we face. Who wants to kick off on this one? Rachel, do you want to kick off?
I think it's worth sort of saying, well, 30 years of trying a fairly, if not longer, of trying a fairly gently approach have not got us. I mean, things could be worse than they are, I suppose, but we are seeing that increasing year on year CO2. So I think we have to try something else. Certainly it's something you want to think quite carefully about. And one way around upsetting people and sending them running is to ask what if questions. So what if we lived in a world, which some of us have experienced recently, where you can hear the birds song as you walk along the roads because there's no traffic there. You know, what if Bristol doesn't smell of diesel? And what if there's trees along the walk along the Avon in Bristol is a beautiful nature-filled place? And so to pose those questions that show you that our future can have some wonderful life-affirming, community-building things in it, even if we don't have that luxury of burning fossil fuels to get the cheap energy to be able to drive around in our individual cars.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to jump in?
I mean, I can talk briefly. I've been able to change language over time. Certainly, as I say, sort of historically, I could only talk about green IT, then I could talk about sustainable IT. Now I can talk about responsible and resilience. Within that, I can talk about climate breakdown, and I can talk about modern slavery and negative social impacts, and I can talk about 80% of our waste going to the Far East and billions of pounds wrapped up in it that we're just simply throwing away. I can have these conversations now openly. Society is changing and quickly, and that is wherever I talk to, and the openness of industry and business to engage in these things is fantastic. We're early stages, so we'll see how this plays out in terms of consumption. The only model for me is circular. It has to be, otherwise this just doesn't make sense. But I do think that we are making rapid progress. Of course, we can do more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, perhaps I could fill in. I was looking for this article that I read the other day that said that when it comes to how serious people consider climate change to be, they saw that only 50% of Swedes considers climate change to be serious, and the other countries that were in the same range were countries like the Netherlands, the rest of the Nordic and Western European countries with high BNP. And of course, that is absolutely devastating that we haven't come further. But I think when it comes to communication, I mean, there are of course a lot of experts on this, but I think, I mean, something you used to hear is that you cannot persuade people by words, but only if you have a more attractive story and more attractive narrative, and if you can find some common grounds that you can start from. So the challenge is enormous.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
My impression is that we now, when we consider this talking the truth, then we all implicitly have in mind the large environmental and sustainability crisis like climate and others. Is that correct? I mean, when I try to break it down back to the ICT and sustainability issue, I think more telling the truth is probably not only needed with a view to the environmental impact of ICT, but more with the larger social disruptions that are taking place within the digital economy, particularly the whole question of data privacy, data commerce, and the huge power imbalances that are increasing every day by vast amounts in terms of financial power of those few companies, the GAFA, but also in terms of the societal discourse power that these actors have. So I think here we need, like, if I mention this to people in the general public, like friends or so, or my family, it tends to sound like a conspiracy, or like you're exaggerating, or still, I mean, we're beyond the point where people think that data protection doesn't affect them. I think most of the people I talk to, they have understood by now that data protection privacy is an issue. They're not saying I give up any information, I don't care. So we're beyond this point, but still, like, the societal implications that has, that is still not understood. So I think here we could actually need more dramatization and definitely speak out the truth more deliberately. And maybe also we need to find some narratives to do that, because it tends to sound a little bit too black and white if you point the finger to Google and Alphabet and Facebook and Amazon, and so it's probably a bit too easy of a narrative. So we need to work on this as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a very important point there about finding the right narratives. To get people's attention, you have to have a good story. We've been, certainly with respect to climate change, we've been producing, we're back to the reports and books and things, but we've been producing data and science-based descriptions of that for at least 30 years. And it doesn't sink in. And it's not until you engage people at an emotional level and say, what kind of, and back to Rachel's point, what kind of world do we really want to live in? What if the world was like this rather than like that? That people do start to say, okay, well, in that case, maybe we should be doing this. So I get the feeling we could carry on this conversation much longer. There's a lot more to be said, but we're butting up against time. Actually, we've only got a couple of minutes left. So maybe what we'll do a very quick go round, closing thought, most important thing perhaps for us to take away from this or to work on. Who wants to lead off?
Okay.
Adam, you have the mic.
All right. Okay, my challenge is, can we get rid of the word sustainability, please? I don't like it. I don't think, picking up on what Rachel was saying, the economy element of sustainability just doesn't stack up anymore. We need to fundamentally change this. This is why I'm using the term responsible and resilient for ICT. For me, those two words are a lot more effective. I was really pleased when PricewaterhouseCoopers, I'm not advocating them at all, but they came back to me saying they've renamed sustainability as responsible and resilient as well, completely unknown to me. That's my challenge to everyone on this group and everyone on the call. Let's have a think about the use of that term and what we actually mean to use it and drive forward.
Okay, absolutely. Who wants to jump in next? Closing thoughts.
So many things. Oh, sorry. Can
yeah,
I?
You're on, Tillman.
There's so many things that came up here, and there's so many things we could work on out there. once we're back to business after this conference. But if we link it to that conference here again, why don't we like try to open up ICT4S even more to more societal actors, to become more transdisciplinary, and even to invite more other disciplines to the field. So for example, the whole debate on social and environmental sustainability, I think we could improve on that as well here in the conference. And I liked the comment of Vlad on Slack, arguing, okay, on the one hand, we should definitely do that. On the other hand, we should stick to our core business science. I think it's not an either or. We should become more strong on both. And I would appreciate if future ICT4S conferences would become more outspoken on the transdisciplinary or the practice-oriented aspects of our research, finding narratives, engaging with other actors, and so on.
Okay, absolutely. Who's going next?
Okay, I try.
We'll give Rachel the last word.
Yes. There are a lot of work ongoing regarding AI and ethics. And I think that is so narrow that we only discuss ethics for AI. Why not for all other emerging technologies? Why not for social media? I really think that needs to be expanded. And I also think when we talk about ethics, there is also an opportunity to bring in the green perspective, the environmental perspectives there, because that also demands a lot of ethics. So widen the ethics dialogue.
Absolutely. Okay, Rachel.
And I think I want to say, you know, there's some absolutely amazing things going on that people are doing individually, collaboratively, institutionally. It's really good to hear about all these things that are happening. But please use the moral and spiritual authority that doing these things gives you to demand that our governments make those changes, because at the moment we're not on that rapid decarbonisation pathway.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. That was a fun and enlightening discussion. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists again. I'd like to thank all of the audience listening in on this. And the Slack channel remains open. One of the questions that did come up on the Slack channel I saw is a couple of people asking if we can get contact information from the panelists. I'll let you guys choose yourself how much you want to reveal, but if you're open to having people contact you, add your contact information into the Slack channel. So with that, I think we're moving into the break now. So thank you very much, everybody.